right, so this is going to be the equal problem. This is just domain and range. And the domain is the timeline. So how many seconds does it start and stop? So if I look, I think it might be easier to start with the stopping point. So to me, this picture, when I say the picture, I mean this curvy weird thing, doesn't exist past 6. So I think that's my boundary on the right. Then I ask myself, where's the other boundary? Well, there's an arrow here, which means that it's going forever. And not only is it going up forever, it's going to the left. So left numbers mean negative infinity. So that's the correct answer for domain. But let's back up a second because I think this one's a little confusing. Imagine this part here wasn't here. So let's erase this and let's pretend the picture looked like that. If that was the case, then I would say, okay, the picture lives on what timeline? And think about the YouTube video that we watched. This is the timeline. So if it starts at -2, then the answer for this domain question would be -2 through 6. So I'm just chopping on the timeline and finding the numbers from the x-axis. And that would be my domain. Okay, so essentially what you're communicating to someone is you're saying, person, if you look at between -2, so right here, and 6 here, and that if you look in that section, in this section, that the picture that you're talking about lives there and just there, no more, no less. So I know that -2, 6 is correct because if I highlight between -2 and 6, the whole picture lives there. Let's say this is the picture and somebody writes down that the domain of this is like 1 to 6. So what they're essentially telling me is that if you live between 1 and 6, or if you look in that section, that the whole picture lives just in those 2 numbers. And that's not true. Like this picture doesn't all fit in that purple highlight. So essentially what you're telling those people is where to look and they'll find the whole picture. So let's go back to this one. If there were a dot here, then the whole picture would live between this line and this line, right? So the answer for that would be -6 and 6 because the picture lives in between those numbers. Those are like your boundaries. But again, that arrow throws the whole thing off because that arrow tells us that it's going up, but as it's going up, that arrow is moving to the side and it's hitting numbers that are negative infinity, -7, -8. As this is going up, this x-axis is extending too, and it's extending in the negative time frame. So that's why the answer is -infinity to 6. The range is almost the exact same idea, except instead of looking at the timeline, you are looking at the height. So I'm literally going to find the lowest point on here because you should be writing it as low to high. The lowest point, I think, on this curve here, the lowest point that I see is that point here. And the height of that lowest point is -4. So that's why my first number here is going to be -4. And now I'm looking for the maximum. The maximum is the highest point. Some kids might think it's this. And if it were there, then maybe that number is like 3.5, and then you would be okay. The problem with that is this isn't actually the highest, and neither is this. Maybe some of you think that this is the highest point, and then the answer would be 6. And I think that's a great wrong response. And the thing is, when you say that there's a number, you're saying that it ends here, that it's trapped between a height of 6 and between a height of -4. But that's not true because this had an arrow, and arrows mean that this doesn't actually stop, that it goes up here and here and here and here and here. So there is a lowest height of -4, but there is no highest point. It has no highest point because it travels all the way to infinity. So that would be your domain and your range for that function.